a 6-year-old girl stops to empty sand out of her shoe. That is the last confirmed moment anyone can account for her. 30 years later, a single strand of hair, pulled out of a truck with a shop vacuum by federal agents, would become the closest thing her mother has ever had to an answer. This is the story of Morgan Nick, and this is the story of the man investigators say they let walk away. Before we get into any of it, the truck, the DNA, the 30 years of silence, you need to know who Morgan Nick actually was, because this case has been reduced to a name on a cold case list for 3 decades, and she deserves better than that. Morgan Chantel Nick was 6 years old. She had 2 younger siblings, Logan and Taryn. She loved being outside. On the night of June 9, 1995, her mother Colleen brought her to a Little League baseball game at Wofford Field in Alma, Arkansas, a small town in Crawford County. The kind of place where everybody's kids play on the same field, where parents don't think twice about letting a 6-year-old chase fireflies 20 feet away while the game wraps up. It was a completely unremarkable Friday night. That's the detail that makes this case so hard to sit with. There was no red flag, no stranger lurking in a way anyone thought to report until it was already too late. Just a summer evening, a baseball game, and a little girl catching lightning bugs with a group of other kids near the parking lot. That is the last normal moment this family will ever have. Here's what we're going to answer in this video, and I want you to hold on to all 3 of these questions, because they don't get answered in order. They get answered on top of each other, right at the end. Question 1. Who was the man witnesses saw talking to Morgan and the other children in the minutes before she vanished? Question 2. How did a red pickup truck with a white camper shell, reported by multiple witnesses that same night, disappear from the investigation for nearly 25 years? Question 3. Why did it take a piece of blonde hair, vacuumed out of a stranger's truck, run through a lab that didn't exist when Morgan disappeared, to bring investigators back to a name they already had in their file in 1995? Stay with me, because the answer to that third question is the part of this case that should make you angry. Let's slow down and walk through exactly what happened, because the timeline here matters more than almost any other case we've covered on this channel. The game at Wofford Field was winding down. Colleen Nick was watching from near her vehicle. A group of children, including Morgan, split off to catch fireflies in the grass near the parking lot. Completely normal, completely visible, completely within eyeshot of dozens of parents. At approximately 10:45 p.m., Morgan came back toward her mother's car. Witnesses say she stopped to empty sand out of her shoes. That's it. That's the last confirmed sighting. A 6-year-old girl, alone for maybe 90 seconds, emptying sand out of a shoe in a parking lot full of families. When the game ended a few minutes later, and Colleen went to gather her daughter, Morgan was gone. Not wandered off, gone. Not fell asleep in the car, gone. Gone in the way that triggers a full-scale search within the hour. Local police, then state police, then the FBI, then the National Guard, then thousands of volunteers combing ditches and tree lines and creek beds across 3 states. And here's what should terrify you about how fast this happened. Witnesses at the game reported seeing an unfamiliar man talking to Morgan and the other children in the area shortly before she disappeared. And separately, not necessarily the same sighting, this is important, witnesses reported a red pickup truck with a white camper shell in the vicinity of the ballfield that night. 2 leads, 2 pieces of information, and for the better part of 3 decades, neither one produced an arrest. What happened over the following days, weeks, and years is one of the most extensive missing child investigations in Arkansas history, and one of the most extensive in the country, period. Alma Police, the Arkansas State Police, and the FBI ran down more than 10,000 individual leads. 10,000. Tips, sightings, psychic hotline calls, false confessions, dead ends, searches of wooded areas across Arkansas and into neighboring Oklahoma. Cadaver dogs, aerial searches, divers in local waterways. For a case with this little physical evidence, that number tells you everything about how hard people were looking, and how completely Morgan's abductor covered his tracks, or how much luck was on his side, depending on how you want to think about it. Then Governor Mike Huckabee got personally involved early on. Years later, in 2015, then Governor Asa Hutchinson went in front of cameras specifically to keep Morgan's case in the public eye. A full 20 years after she disappeared, a sitting governor was still standing at a podium asking Arkansans to remember a 6-year-old girl's name. That's not normal for a cold case. That tells you how deep this wound sits in the state's identity. And through all of it, every search, every tip, every decade, investigators kept coming back to the same two threads: the unidentified man near the children and the red truck with the white camper shell. This is the part of the story that I need you to really sit with, because this is where the case stops being about an unknown monster in the dark and starts being about a system that had a name and let it go. His name was Billy Jack Lincks. Lincks was born and raised right there in Crawford County, Arkansas, the same county Morgan disappeared in. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II. Afterward, he worked at Braniff Airlines in Dallas, Texas, from 1962 until 1974. Sometime in the late 1970s, he moved back to Van Buren, Arkansas, a town about 10 minutes down the interstate from Alma. By 1995, he was in his 70s, driving a red 1986 Chevrolet pickup truck. Now here's where this stops being a coincidence and starts being a documented pattern. On August 29, 1995, just 2 months, almost to the day, after Morgan disappeared, Billy Jack Lincks drank a fifth of rum, got in that red truck, and drove from Fort Smith to a Sonic restaurant in downtown Van Buren, at the corner of 5th and Broadway. There, according to court documents, he approached a group of children, 4 boys, 3 of whom were brothers, and an 11-year-old girl who was with them. He offered the boys money to leave. Then, alone with the 11-year-old on a nearby street corner, he offered her money in exchange for sexual favors. She ran, screaming, crying, back to the Sonic, telling her brothers to call the police. Lincks sped off and hit a telephone pole doing it. Red paint from his truck scraped onto that pole. That paint transfer, combined with the girl's description, is what led investigators straight to him. He was brought in for questioning the very next day, August 30th, 1995. The detective who interviewed him, Kevin Johnson, later described Lincks as calm, never combative, never argumentative, but evasive about the details of where he'd actually been. Lincks was ultimately arrested and convicted of sexual solicitation of a child for the Van Buren incident. He was sentenced to prison. Read that again. A man in a red pickup truck, attempting to lure a child into that truck. 8 miles from the exact ball field where Morgan vanished, 2 months after her disappearance. And investigators, who already had witness reports of a red pickup truck near Wofford Field the night Morgan went missing, brought him in, questioned him about Morgan specifically, and let him go. Reports say Lincks denied any knowledge of Morgan's disappearance and appeared to be truthful to the investigators at the time, so they moved on. Billy Jack Lincks died in prison in the year 2000, serving out his sentence for the Van Buren attempted abduction. He died having never been charged in Morgan Nick's case. He died, as far as the official record was concerned, unconnected to the most searched-for missing child in Arkansas history. He would not become a suspect for another 21 years. This is where the case comes back to life, and where I want you to notice something, because it's a pattern we see over and over again on this channel. It wasn't new evidence that cracked this case open. It was somebody simply going back and rereading the file. In July 2019, the Alma Police Department launched a fresh review of Morgan's case from the very beginning. Retired Captain Brett Hartley went back to square one, back through decades of leads, tips, and interview notes, and there it was again. Billy Jack Lincks, the red truck, the Sonic incident, the 8 miles, the 2 months. In 2020, investigators tracked down the actual truck Lincks had owned in 1995. It had changed hands multiple times over 25 years, but they found it, with a new owner who agreed to let police search it. Federal Evidence Response Team agents processed that truck like it was a brand new crime scene. Even though a quarter century had passed, they got into every crevice. They vacuumed the interior, collecting canisters of dirt, fiber, and hair. Anything that might still be sitting in the seams of a 25-year-old truck cab. That evidence went to the FBI in 2020. In November 2021, the FBI took the unusual step of publicly naming Billy Jack Lincks as a person of interest and putting out a nationwide request for information about his life. asking anyone who knew him through school, work, church, or any social circle to come forward. The Bureau was explicit that this didn't mean the case was solved. It meant they believed they were finally getting closer. But there was a problem. The hair recovered from that truck didn't have a root. And in 2021, that mattered. Without a root, standard forensic DNA testing couldn't produce a usable profile. They had the physical evidence. They didn't yet have the science to use it. This next part is, genuinely, one of the more remarkable forensic developments in a modern cold case, and I want to walk through it carefully because it matters for cases far beyond Morgan's. By December 2023, forensic genealogy had advanced to the point where a specialized lab, Othram Labs, based in Texas, had developed new techniques capable of extracting usable genetic information from rootless hair. That's a big deal. For decades, a hair without a root was considered forensically almost useless for DNA purposes. Othram's process changed that. With cooperation from the FBI and funding from the Arkansas State Police, the vacuumed evidence from Lincks' truck was sent to that Texas lab. Scientists pulled a genetic panel from the rootless hair and compared it against a DNA sample from Colleen Nick, Morgan's mother. On September 27, 2024, the lab called Alma police with the results. The hair recovered from Billy Jack Lincks' truck showed a parent-child genetic relationship with Colleen Nick. Let that sit for a second. Investigators were blunt about what that meant. There is no one else in the Nick family who was ever in that truck. Genealogist Michael Middleman, who worked the case, said it plainly. The only explanation that fits is that the hair belonged to Morgan. A hair, in a truck, belonging to a man who tried to abduct another child 8 miles away, 2 months later. In the same kind of red truck witnesses described the night Morgan disappeared. On October 1, 2024, Alma Police Chief Jeff Pointer stood in front of cameras and did something that hadn't happened in this case in almost 30 years. He officially named a primary suspect, Billy Jack Lincks. Chief Pointer told the room that the lab report strongly indicates that Morgan had been in the truck. Not may have. Not possibly, strongly indicates. Colleen Nick was there. After nearly 30 years of press conferences that produced nothing, after decades of being asked to hope, to wait, to keep believing, she stood in front of reporters and said the words she had waited a generation to say out loud. He stole Morgan from me. He stole her from her dad. He stole her from Logan and Taryn. She also said something that I think captures this entire case better than anything I could write for you. It felt like losing Morgan all over again. Think about what that means. A DNA match, the thing this family had prayed for since before smartphones existed, before Amber Alerts had a name, didn't feel like closure. It felt like grief, freshly reopened. Because a name isn't a body, a suspect isn't an answer. Billy Jack Lincks can never sit in a courtroom. He can never be forced to say what happened to her. He can never lead investigators to where she is. As Colleen put it herself, he'll never have to stand and face justice here on Earth for what he did to Morgan. Naming a suspect who has been dead for a quarter century does not close a missing person case. It opens a new phase of one. Since October 2024, Alma police have been working to reconstruct the entirety of Billy Jack Lincks' life. His movements, his relationships, his known associates, in the hope that someone out there remembers something that connects him more concretely to what actually happened to Morgan after 10:45 p.m. on June 9, 1995. Chief Pointer has said the department is trying to peel back the layers on Lincks' background specifically to find out where he might have gone, who he might have known, and, the thing this family needs most, where Morgan might be. Because here is the part that true crime coverage sometimes glosses over, and we're not going to do that on this channel. Morgan Nick has never been found. A DNA match to a truck tells you a girl was inside that vehicle. It does not tell you what happened after that. It does not give her family a place to grieve. It does not give investigators a location to search. Somewhere, in Crawford County, or beyond it, there may be an answer that 30 years, 10,000 leads, and a groundbreaking DNA breakthrough still haven't produced. In June 2025, Morgan's case passed a devastating milestone, 30 years missing. Arkansas Secretary of State Cole Jester ordered the state capitol lit pink that night in her honor, a color chosen deliberately to keep her memory, and the search for her, visible to an entire state. I want to spend a few minutes here, not on the crime, but on what Morgan's mother built out of the wreckage of it, because this is the part of the story that actually deserves the word legacy. In 1996, less than a year after Morgan disappeared, Colleen Nick founded the Morgan Nick Foundation. It's not a memorial in the passive sense. It's an active nonprofit that works with families of missing children, funds and supports search efforts, and runs child safety education programs aimed at preventing exactly the kind of split-second vulnerability that took her daughter. And here's something a lot of people outside Arkansas don't know. The state's Amber Alert system, the one that flashes on highway signs and pushes to your phone when a child goes missing, is officially named the Morgan Nick Amber Alert. Every single time that alert fires in Arkansas, it carries her name. Every time a child is recovered because of it, it is, in some very real sense, Morgan's legacy, doing exactly what her mother built it to do, even though it came too late to save her. Morgan's case has also been the subject of multiple documentaries and news specials over the decades, and, as of the last major update in this case, Hulu has announced a new true crime series specifically about her disappearance, a sign that this case is about to reach a far bigger audience than it ever has before. 30 years in, Colleen Nick is still doing interviews, still standing at podiums, still saying her daughter's name out loud to reporters, to investigators, to strangers on the internet, to anyone who might be listening and might remember something. Let's go back to the 3 questions we opened with. Who was the man witnesses saw near the children before Morgan vanished? We still don't know for certain, but the profile investigators are building around Billy Jack Lincks, a man convicted of attempting exactly this kind of abduction 8 miles away just 2 months later, lines up in a way that's very hard to dismiss as coincidence. How did a red pickup truck with a white camper shell disappear from the investigation for 25 years? It didn't disappear. The man attached to it did. He was interviewed. He lied, or at least investigators believed he told the truth when he shouldn't have been believed. And then he died in prison before anyone connected the dots. And why did it take 30 years and a laboratory technique that didn't exist in 1995 to bring investigators back to a name that was already sitting in their own file? Because forensic science had to catch up to a truck that had already been searched once, with the wrong tools, at the wrong time, before rootless hair DNA extraction was even possible. That's not a twist ending. That's just what happens when the technology to prove something takes longer to arrive than the person responsible for it takes to die. Morgan Nick would be in her mid-30s now. She might have kids of her own. She might have a career, a life, a home somewhere none of us will ever get to know about. Because on one ordinary summer night, for about 90 seconds, nobody was watching a 6-year-old empty sand out of her shoe. That's the part of this case I want you to carry with you. More than the truck, more than the DNA, more than the name Billy Jack Lincks. Not the mechanics of how she was taken, the fact that she still isn't home. Her mother built a foundation, named an alert system, and spent 30 years refusing to let this state forget her daughter's name. The least this channel can do is say it one more time, to as many people as possible. Her name was Morgan Chantel Nick, and somewhere, someone may still know exactly what happened to her. I want to leave you with a question, and I actually want you to answer it in the comments, because this is the part of the case that still doesn't sit right with me. In 1995, investigators had the man, had the truck, and had a documented abduction attempt 8 miles away, and they let him go because he appeared truthful. What do you think happens differently in this case if that interview goes another way? Drop your theory below. I read every single one of these threads. If this is the kind of case you want more of, this channel exists specifically to keep unsolved cases like Morgan's in front of people who might actually remember something useful. As soon as there's another development in this case, an arrest, a new location, anything, you will be the first to know. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell on, because I promise you, this story is not finished.